Chapter 3 of Louise de la Valliere. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Philip Griffiths. Louise de la Valliere by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 3, in which the reader will be delighted to find that Porthos has lost none of his muscularity. D'Artagnan had, according to his usual style, calculated that every hour is worth 60 minutes, and every minute worth 60 seconds. Thanks to this perfectly exact calculation of minutes and seconds, he reached the superintendent's door at the very moment the soldier was leaving it with his belt empty. D'Artagnan presented himself at the door, which a porter with a profusely embroidered livery held half opened for him. D'Artagnan would very much have liked to enter without giving his name, but this was impossible, and so he gave it. Notwithstanding this concession, which ought to have removed every difficulty in the way, at least D'Artagnan thought so, the concierge hesitated. However, at the second repetition of the title Captain of the King's Guards, the concierge, without quite leaving the passage clear for him, ceased to bar it completely. D'Artagnan understood that orders of the most positive character had been given. He decided, therefore, to tell a falsehood, a circumstance, moreover, which did not seriously affect his peace of mind, when he saw that beyond the falsehood the safety of the state itself, or even purely and simply his own individual personal interest, might be at stake. He moreover added to the declarations he had already made that the soldier sent to M. du Vallon was his own messenger, and that the only object that letter had in view was to announce his intended arrival. From that moment no one opposed D'Artagnan's entrance any further, and he entered accordingly. A valet wished to accompany him, but he answered that it was useless to take that trouble on his account, inasmuch as he knew perfectly well where M. du Vallon was. There was nothing, of course, to say to a man so thoroughly and completely informed on all points, and D'Artagnan was permitted, therefore, to do as he liked. The terraces, the magnificent apartments, the gardens, were all reviewed and narrowly inspected by the musketeer. He walked for a quarter of an hour in this more than royal residence, which included as many wonders as articles of furniture, and as many servants as there were columns and doors. "Decidedly," he said to himself, "this mansion has no other limits than the pillars of the habitable world. Is it probable Porthos has taken it into his head to go back to Pierrefonds without even leaving M. Fouquet's house?" He finally reached a remote part of the chateau, enclosed by a stone wall, which was covered with a profusion of thick plants, luxuriant in blossoms as large and solid as fruit. At equal distances on the top of this wall were placed various statues in timid or mysterious attitudes. These were vestals, hidden beneath the long Greek peplum, with its thick, sinuous folds, agile nymphs covered with their marble veils, and guarding the palace with their fugitive glances. A statue of Hermes with his finger on his lips, one of Iris with extended wings, another of Night, sprinkled all over with poppies, dominated the gardens and outbuildings, which could be seen through the trees. All these statues threw in white relief their profiles upon the dark ground of the tall cypresses which darted their sombre summits towards the sky. Around these cypresses were entwined climbing roses, whose flowering rings were fastened to every fork of the branches, and spread over the lower boughs and the various statues showers of flowers of the rarest fragrance. These enchantments seemed to the musketeer the result of the greatest efforts of the human mind. He felt in a dreamy, almost poetical frame of mind. The idea that Porthos was living in so perfect an Eden gave him a higher idea of Porthos showing how tremendously true it is that even the very highest orders of minds are not quite exempt from the influence of surroundings. D'Artagnan found the door, and on, or rather in the door, a kind of spring which he detected. Having touched it, the door flew open. D'Artagnan entered, closed the door behind him, and advanced into a pavilion built in a circular form, in which no other sound could be heard but cascades and the songs of birds. At the door of the pavilion he met a lackey. "It is here, I believe," said D'Artagnan without hesitation, "that Monsieur le Baron du Vallon is staying?" "Yes, monsieur," answered the lackey. "Have the goodness to tell him that Monsieur le Chevalier d'Artagnan, captain of the king's musketeers, is waiting to see him." D'Artagnan was introduced into the salon, and had not long to remain in expectation. A well-remembered step shook the floor of the adjoining room, a door opened, or rather flew open, and Porthos appeared and threw himself into his friend's arms with a sort of embarrassment which did not ill become him. "You here?" he exclaimed. "And you," replied D'Artagnan. "Ah, you sly fellow!" "Yes," said Porthos, with a somewhat embarrassed smile. "Yes, you see, I am staying in M. Fouquet's house, at which you are not a little surprised, I suppose." "Not at all. Why should you not be one of M. Fouquet's friends? M. Fouquet has a very large number, particularly among clever men." Porthos had the modesty not to take the compliment to himself. "Besides," he added, "you saw me at Belle Isle." "A greater reason for my believing you to be one of M. Fouquet's friends." "The fact is, I am acquainted with him," said Porthos, with a certain embarrassment of manner. "Ah, friend Porthos," said D'Artagnan, "how treacherously you have behaved towards me." "In what way?" exclaimed Porthos. "What? You complete so admirable a work as the fortifications of Belle Isle, and you did not tell me of it?" Porthos colored. "Nay, more than that," continued D'Artagnan. "You saw me out yonder, you know I am in the king's service, and yet you could not guess that the king, jealously desirous of learning the name of the man whose abilities had wrought a work of which he heard the most wonderful accounts, you could not guess, I say, that the king sent me to learn who this man was?" "What? The king sent you to learn?" "Of course; but don't let us speak of that any more." "Not speak of it?" said Porthos. "On the contrary, we will speak of it. And so the king knew that we were fortifying Belle Isle?" "Of course. Does not the king know everything?" "But he did not know who was fortifying it?" "No, he only suspected, from what he had been told of the nature of the works, that it was some celebrated soldier or another." "The devil!" said Porthos. "If I had only known that!" "You would not have run away from Vannes, as you did, perhaps?" "No." "What did you say when you couldn't find me?" "My dear fellow, I reflected." "Ah, indeed, you reflect, do you? Well, and what did that reflection lead to?" "It led me to guess the whole truth." "Come, then, tell me, what did you guess after all?" said Porthos, settling himself into an armchair, and assuming the airs of a sphinx. "I guessed, in the first place, that you were fortifying Belle Isle." "There was no great difficulty in that, for you saw me at work." "Wait a minute, I also guessed something else, that you were fortifying Belle Isle by M. Fouquet's orders." "That's true." "But even that is not all. Whenever I feel myself in trim for guessing, I do not stop on my road, and so I guessed that M. Fouquet wished to preserve the most absolute secrecy respecting those fortifications." "I believe that was his intention, in fact," said Porthos. "Yes, but do you know why he wished to keep it secret?" "In order that it should not become known, perhaps," said Porthos. "That was his principal reason, but his wish was subservient to a bit of generosity." "In fact," said Porthos, "I have heard it said that M. Fouquet was a very generous man." "To a bit of generosity he wished to exhibit towards the king." "Oh, oh! You seem surprised at that." "Yes." "And you didn't guess?" "No." "Well, I know it then." "You are a wizard." "Not at all, I assure you." "How do you know it, then?" "By a very simple means. I heard M. Fouquet himself say so to the king." "Say what to the king?" "That he fortified Belle Isle on his majesty's account, and that he had made him a present of Belle Isle." "And you heard M. Fouquet say that to the king?" "In those very words. He even added, 'Belle Isle has been fortified by an engineer, one of my friends, a man of a great deal of merit, whom I shall ask your majesty's permission to present to you.'" "What is his name?" said the king. "The Baron du Vallon," M. Fouquet replied. "Very well," returned his majesty, "you will present him to me." "The king said that?" "Upon the word of D'Artagnan." "Oh, oh!" said Porthos. "Why have I not been presented, then?" "Have they not spoken to you about this presentation?" "Yes, certainly, but I am always kept waiting for it." "Be easy, it will be sure to come." "Hum, hum," grumbled Porthos, which D'Artagnan pretended not to hear, and, changing the conversation, he said, "You seem to be living in a very solitary place here, my dear fellow." "I always preferred retirement. I am of a melancholy disposition," replied Porthos, with a sigh. "Really, that is odd," said D'Artagnan. "I never remarked that before." "It is only since I have taken to reading," said Porthos, with a thoughtful air. "But the labors of the mind have not affected the health of the body, I trust?" "Not in the slightest degree." "Your strength is as great as ever?" "Too great, my friend, too great." "Ah, I had heard that for a short time after your arrival—" "That I could hardly move a limb, I suppose?" "How was it?" said D'Artagnan, smiling, "and why was it you could not move?" Porthos, perceiving that he had made a mistake, wished to correct it. "Yes, I came from Belle Isle upon very hard horses," he said, "and that fatigued me." "I'm no longer astonished, then, since I, who followed you, found 7 or 8 lying dead on the road." "I am very heavy, you know," said Porthos. "So that you were bruised all over." "My marrow melted. That made me very ill." "Poor Porthos! But how did Aramis act towards you under those circumstances?" "Very well, indeed. He had me attended to by M. Fouquet's own doctor. But just imagine, at the end of a week I could not breathe any longer." "What do you mean?" "The room was too small. I had absorbed every atom of air." "Indeed!" "I was told so, at least. and so I was removed into another apartment, where you were able to breathe, I hope and trust." "Yes, more freely, but no exercise, nothing to do. The doctor pretended that I was not to stir. I, on the contrary, felt that I was stronger than ever. That was the cause of a very serious accident." "What accident?" "Fancy, my dear fellow, that I revolted against the directions of that ass of a doctor, and I resolved to go out, whether it suited him or not, and, consequently, I told the valet who waited on me to bring me my clothes." "You were quite naked, then?" "Oh, no, on the contrary, I had a magnificent dressing gown to wear. The lackey obeyed. I dressed myself in my own clothes, which had become too large for me. But a strange circumstance had happened. My feet had become too large." "Yes, I quite understand." "And my boots too small." "You mean your feet were still swollen?" "Exactly. You have hit it." "Pardieu! And is that the accident you were going to tell me about?" "Oh, yes. I did not make the same reflection you have done. I said to myself, 'Since my feet have entered my boots 10 times, there is no reason why they should not go in the 11th.' Allow me to tell you, my dear Porthos, that on this occasion you failed in your logic. In short, then, they placed me opposite to a part of the room which was partitioned. I tried to get my boot on. I pulled it with my hands. I pushed with all the strength of the muscles of my leg, making the most unheard of efforts. Then, suddenly, the 2 tags of my boot remained in my hands, and my foot struck out like a ballista." "How learned you are in fortification, dear Porthos!" "My foot darted out like a ballista and came against the partition, which it broke in. I really thought that, like Samson, I had demolished the temple. And the number of pictures, the quantity of china, vases of flowers, carpets, and window panes that fell down were really wonderful." "Indeed!" "Without reckoning that, on the other side of the partition, was a small table laden with porcelain." "Which you knocked over?" "Which I dashed to the other side of the room," said Porthos, laughing. "Upon my word, it is, as you say, astonishing," replied D'Artagnan, beginning to laugh also, whereupon Porthos laughed louder than ever. "I broke," said Porthos, in a voice half choked from his increasing mirth, "more than 3,000 francs worth of china. Ha, ha, ha!" "Good," said D'Artagnan. "I smashed more than 4,000 francs worth of glass. Ho, 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 ho!" "Excellent." "Without counting a luster, which fell on my head and was broken into 1,000 pieces. Ha, ha, ha!" "Upon your head?" said D'Artagnan, holding his sides. "On top." "But your head was broken, I suppose?" "No, since I tell you, on the contrary, my dear fellow, that it was the luster which was broken, like glass, which, in point of fact, it was." "Ah, the luster was glass, you say?" "Venetian glass, a perfect curiosity, quite matchless indeed, and weighed 200 pounds." "And it fell upon your head?" "Upon my head. Just imagine, a globe of crystal, gilded all over, the lower part beautifully encrusted, perfumes burning at the top, with jets from which flames issued when they were lighted." "I quite understand. But they were not lighted at the time, I suppose?" "Happily not, or I should have been grilled prematurely." "And you were only knocked down flat instead?" "Not at all." "How not at all?" "Why, the luster fell on my skull. It appears that we have, upon the top of our heads, an exceedingly thick crust." "Who told you that, Porthos?" "The doctor. A sort of dome which would bear Notre Dame." "Bah!" "Yes, it seems that our skulls are made in that manner." "Speak for yourself, my dear fellow. It is your own skull that is made in that manner, and not the skulls of other people." "Well, that may be so," said Porthos, conceitedly. "So much, however, was that the case in my instance, that no sooner did the luster fall upon the dome which we have at the top of our head, than there was a report like a cannon, the crystal was broken to pieces, and I fell, covered from head to foot." "With blood? Poor Porthos!" "Not at all. With perfumes which smelt like rich creams. It was delicious, but the odor was too strong, and I felt quite giddy from it. Perhaps you have experienced it sometimes yourself, D'Artagnan?" "Yes, in inhaling the scent of the lily of the valley, so that, my poor friend, you were knocked over by the shock and overpowered by the perfumes?" "Yes, but what is very remarkable, for the doctor told me he had never seen anything like it." "You had a bump on your head, I suppose?" interrupted D'Artagnan. "I had 5." "Why 5?" "I will tell you. The luster had, at its lower extremity, 5 gilt ornaments, excessively sharp." "Oh!" "Well, these 5 ornaments penetrated my hair, which, as you see, I wear very thick." "Fortunately so." "And they made a mark on my skin. But just notice the singularity of it. These things seem really only to happen to me. Instead of making indentations, they made bumps. The doctor could never succeed in explaining that to me satisfactorily." "Well, then, I will explain it to you." "You will do me a great service if you will," said Porthos, winking his eyes, which, with him, was the sign of the profoundest attention. "Since you've been employing your brain in studies of an exalted character, in important calculations, and so on, the head has gained a certain advantage, so that your head is now too full of science." "Do you think so?" "I'm sure of it. The result is that, instead of allowing any foreign matter to penetrate the interior of the head, your bony box or skull, which is already too full, avails itself of the openings which are made in allowing this excess to escape." "Ah!" said Porthos, to whom this explanation appeared clearer than that of the doctor. "The 5 protuberances caused by the 5 ornaments of the luster must certainly have been scientific globules brought to the surface by the force of circumstances." "In fact," said Porthos, "the real truth is, that I felt far worse outside my head than inside. I will even confess that when I put my hat upon my head, clapping it on my head with that graceful energy which we gentlemen of the sword possess, if my fist was not very gently applied, I experienced the most painful sensations." "I quite believe you, Porthos." "Therefore, my friend," said the giant, "Monsieur Fouquet decided, seeing how slightly built the house was, to give me another lodging, and so they brought me here. It is the private park, I think, is it not?" "Yes." "Where the rendezvous are made. That park, indeed, which is so celebrated in some of those mysterious stories about the superintendent." "I don't know. I have had no rendezvous, or heard mysterious stories myself, but they have authorized me to exercise my muscles, and I take advantage of the permission by rooting up some of the trees." "What for?" "To keep my hand in, and also to take some birds' nests. I find it more convenient than climbing." "You are as pastoral as Tircis, my dear Porthos." "Yes, I like the small eggs. I like them very much better than larger ones. You have no idea how delicate an omelette is if made of 400 or 500 eggs of linnets, chaffinches, starlings, blackbirds, and thrushes." "But 500 eggs is perfectly monstrous." "A salad bowl will hold them easily enough," said Porthos. D'Artagnan looked at Porthos admiringly for full 5 minutes, as if he had seen him for the first time, while Porthos spread his chest out joyously and proudly. They remained in this state several minutes, Porthos smiling, and D'Artagnan looking at him. D'Artagnan was evidently trying to give the conversation a new turn. "Do you amuse yourself much here, Porthos?" he asked at last, very likely after he had found out what he was searching for. "Not always." "I can imagine that. But when you get thoroughly bored, by and by, what do you intend to do?" "Oh, I shall not be here for any length of time. Aramis is waiting until the last bump on my head disappears, in order to present me to the king, who, I am told, cannot endure the sight of a bump." "Aramis is still in Paris, then?" "No." "Whereabouts is he, then?" "At Fontainebleau." "Alone?" "With M. Fouquet." "Very good. But do you happen to know one thing?" "No." "Tell it me, and then I shall know." "Well, then, I think Aramis is forgetting you." "Do you really think so?" "Yes, for at Fontainebleau yonder, you must know, they are laughing, dancing, banqueting, and drawing the corks of M. de Mazarin's wine in fine style. Are you aware they have a ballet every evening there?" "The deuce they have!" "I assure you that your dear Aramis is forgetting you." "Well, that is not at all unlikely, and I have myself thought so sometimes." "Unless he is playing you a trick, the sly fellow." "Oh! You know that Aramis is as sly as a fox." "Yes, but to play me a trick. Listen, in the first place, he puts you under a sort of sequestration." "He sequestrates me? Do you mean to say I am sequestrated?" "I think so." "I wish you would have the goodness to prove that to me." "Nothing easier. Do you ever go out?" "Never." "Do you ever ride on horseback?" "Never." "Are your friends allowed to come and see you?" "Never." "Very well, then, never to go out, never to ride on horseback, never to be allowed to see your friends. That is called being sequestrated." "But why should Aramis sequestrate me?" inquired Porthos. "Come," said D'Artagnan, "be frank, Porthos." "As gold." It was Aramis who drew the plan of the fortifications at Belle Isle, was it not?" Porthos coloured as he said, "Yes, but that was all he did." "Exactly, and my own opinion is that it was no very great affair after all." "That is mine too." "Very good. I am delighted we are of the same opinion." "He never even came to Belle Isle," said Porthos. "There now, you see." "It was I who went to Vannes, as you may have seen." "Say rather, as I did see." "Well, that is precisely the state of the case, my dear Porthos. Aramis, who only drew the plans, wishes to pass himself off as the engineer, whilst you, who stone by stone built the wall, the citadel, and the bastions, he wishes to reduce to the rank of a mere builder." "By builder, you mean mason, perhaps?" "Mason, the very word." "Plasterer, in fact." "Hodman." "Exactly." "Oh, oh, my dear Aramis, you seem to think you are only 25 years of age still." "Yes, and that is not all, for he believes you are 50. I should have amazingly liked to have seen him at work." "Yes, indeed." "A fellow who has got the gout?" "Yes." "Who has lost 3 of his teeth?" "4." "While I look at mine." And Porthos, opening his large mouth very wide, displayed 2 rows of teeth, not quite as white as snow, but even, hard, and sound as ivory. "You can hardly believe, Porthos," said D'Artagnan, "what a fancy the king has for good teeth. Yours decide me. I will present you to the king myself." "You? Why not? Do you think I have less credit at court than Aramis?" "Oh, no." "Do you think I have the slightest pretensions upon the fortifications at Belle Isle?" "Certainly not." "It is your own interest alone which would induce me to do it." "I don't doubt it in the least." "Well, I am the intimate friend of the king, and a proof of that is that whenever there is anything disagreeable to tell him, it is I who have to do it." "But, dear D'Artagnan, if you present me—" "Well?" "Aramis will be angry." "With me?" "No, with me." "Bah! Whether he or I present you, since you are to be presented, what does it matter?" "They were going to get me some clothes made." "Your own are splendid." "Oh, those I had ordered were far more beautiful." "Take care, the king likes simplicity." "In that case, I will be simple." "But what will M. Fouquet say when he learns that I have left?" "Are you a prisoner, then, on parole?" "No, not quite that; but I promised him I would not leave without letting him know." "Wait a minute, we shall return to that presently. Have you anything to do here?" "I? Nothing; nothing of any importance, at least." "Unless, indeed, you are Aramis's representative for something of importance." "By no means." "What I tell you, pray understand that, is out of interest for you. I suppose, for instance, that you are commissioned to send messages and letters to him?" "Ah, letters, yes. I send certain letters to him." "Where?" "To Fontainebleau." "Have you any letters, then?" "But—" "Nay, let me speak. Have you any letters, I say?" I have just received one for him. Interesting? I suppose so. You do not read them, then? I am not at all curious, said Porthos, as he drew out of his pocket the soldier's letter, which Porthos had not read, but D'Artagnan had. Do you know what to do with it? Said D'Artagnan. Of course. Do as I always do. Send it to him. Not so. Why not? Keep it, then. Did they not tell you that this letter was important? Very important. Well, you must take it yourself to Fontainebleau. To Aramis? Yes. Very good. And since the king is there, you will profit by that. I shall profit by the opportunity to present you to the king. Ah, D'Artagnan, there is no one like you for expedients. Therefore, instead of forwarding to our friend any messages, which may or may not be faithfully delivered, we will ourselves be the bearers of the letter. I had never even thought of that, and yet it is simple enough. And therefore, because it is urgent, Porthos, we ought to set off at once. In fact, said Porthos, the sooner we set off, the less chance there is of Aramis's letter being delayed. Porthos, your reasoning is always accurate, and in your case, logic seems to serve as an auxiliary to the imagination. Do you think so? Said Porthos. It is the result of your hard reading, replied D'Artagnan. So, come along, let us be off. But, said Porthos, my promise to Monsieur Fouquet. Which? Not to leave Saint-Mande without telling him of it. Ah, Porthos, said D'Artagnan, how very young you still are. In what way? You are going to Fontainebleau, are you not, where you will find Monsieur Fouquet? Yes. Probably in the king's palace? Yes, repeated Porthos, with an air full of majesty. Well, you will accost him with these words: Monsieur Fouquet, I have the honor to inform you that I have just left Saint-Mande. And, said Porthos, with the same majestic mien, seeing me at Fontainebleau at the king's, Monsieur Fouquet will not be able to tell me I am not speaking the truth. My dear Porthos, I was just on the point of opening my lips to make the same remark, but you anticipate me in everything. Oh, Porthos, how fortunately you are gifted! Years have made not the slightest impression on you. Not overmuch, certainly. Then there is nothing more to say? I think not. All your scruples are removed? Quite so. In that case, I shall carry you off with me. Exactly, and I will go and get my horse saddled. You have horses here, then? I have 5. You had them sent from Pierrefonds, I suppose? No, Monsieur Fouquet gave them to me. My dear Porthos, we shall not want 5 horses for 2 persons. Besides, I have already 3 in Paris, which would make 8, and that will be too many. It would not be too many if I had some of my servants here, but alas, I have not got them. Do you regret them, then? I regret Mousqueton. I miss Mousqueton. What a good-hearted fellow you are, Porthos, said D'Artagnan. But the best thing you can do is to leave your horses here, as you have left Mousqueton out yonder. Why so? Because by and by it might turn out a very good thing if Monsieur Fouquet had never given you anything at all. I don't understand you, said Porthos. It is not necessary you should understand. But yet, I will explain to you later, Porthos. I'll wager it is some piece of policy or other." "And of the most subtle character," returned D'Artagnan. Porthos nodded his head at this word policy. Then, after a moment's reflection, he added, "I confess, D'Artagnan, that I am no politician." "I know that well." "Oh, no one knows what you told me yourself, you, the bravest of the brave." "What did I tell you, Porthos?" "That every man has his day. You told me so, and I have experienced it myself. There are certain days when one feels less pleasure than others in exposing oneself to a bullet or a sword thrust." "Exactly my own idea." "And mine too, although I can hardly believe in blows or thrusts that kill outright." "The deuce! And yet you have killed a few in your time." "Yes, but I have never been killed." "Your reason is a very good one." "Therefore I do not believe I shall ever die from a thrust of a sword or a gunshot." "In that case, then, you are afraid of nothing. Ah, water, perhaps?" "Oh, I swim like an otter." "Of a quartan fever, then?" "I have never had one yet, and I don't believe I ever shall. But there is one thing I will admit," and Porthos dropped his voice. "What is that?" asked D'Artagnan, adopting the same tone of voice as Porthos. "I must confess," repeated Porthos, "that I am horribly afraid of politics." "Ah, bah!" exclaimed D'Artagnan. "Upon my word, it's true," said Porthos, in a stentorian voice. "I have seen his eminence Monsieur le Cardinal de Richelieu, and his eminence Monsieur le Cardinal de Mazarin. The one was a red politician, the other a black politician. I never felt very much more satisfied with the one than with the other. The first struck off the heads of M. de Marillac, M. de Thou, M. de Cinq Mars, M. Chalais, M. de Bouteville, and M. de Montmorency. The second got a whole crowd of Frondeurs cut in pieces, and we belonged to them." "On the contrary, we did not belong to them," said D'Artagnan. "Oh, indeed, yes; for if I unsheathed my sword for the cardinal, I struck it for the king." "My good Porthos!" "Well, I have done. My dread of politics is such, that if there is any question of politics in the matter, I should greatly prefer to return to Pierrefonds." "You would be quite right if that were the case. But with me, my dear Porthos, no politics at all, that is quite clear. You have labored hard in fortifying Belle Isle. The king wished to know the name of the clever engineer under whose directions the works were carried out. You are modest, as all men of true genius are. Perhaps Aramis wishes to put you under a bushel, but I happen to seize hold of you. I make it known who you are. I produce you. The king rewards you, and that is the only policy I have to do with." "And the only one I will have to do with either," said Porthos, holding out his hand to D'Artagnan. But D'Artagnan knew Porthos's grasp. He knew that once imprisoned within the baron's 5 fingers, no hand ever left it without being half crushed. He therefore held out not his hand, but his fist, and Porthos did not even perceive the difference. The servants talked a little with each other in an undertone, and whispered a few words, which D'Artagnan understood, but which he took very good care not to let Porthos understand. "Our friend," he said to himself, "was really and truly Aramis's prisoner. Let us now see what the result will be of the liberation of the captive." Chapter 4